And welcome back to the Protagonists. We're going to be talking about the overt. What would I say? The government is targeting, and I think quite unfairly, right-wing groups, including sovereign citizens, as extremists. Now, Albanese, this followed the Bondi Massacre. Anthony Albanese, our Prime Minister, said that white supremacy and sovereign citizen movements are the most concerning ideological threats to Australia's security. He indicated that certain right-wing groups and sovereign citizens were extremist threats that need to be isolated. We're going to talk to a panel today about this statement, about this truly, I think, hysterical, incompetent Prime Minister. In my opinion, I think he's a disgrace to Australia. We're going to find out who Anthony Albanese is referring to. Our panel is Shane Healey, so I'm going to bring them in right now. Shane Healey, a terrorism and youth justice expert, and Harry Hatzikalimios, a retired detective and a federal detective too. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. I'm just going to bring you in this manually here. Thank you very much for joining me. Can you just tell me your views on, and first of all, Shane, because you're an expert, you know, but you've dealt with this sort of stuff all, not all your life, but a great deal of it. The Prime Minister targeting the sovereign citizens as a whole and referring to them as right-wing extremist groups, and then you have also the white supremacist. What do we make of the Prime Minister? Is he overreacting, or what's your views? I mean, and I know some sovereign citizens, and I don't agree with them, by the way, but they're hardly terrorists, in my opinion. We need you to turn your mic on, Shane, if you wouldn't mind. That's the thing that says turn me on.
Yep. Sorry. Can you hear me?
We can indeed, sir.
Excellent. Yeah. So we've got to split them up. The sovereign citizen piece is really an annoyance for the Australian legal system. As far as in the violent extremism, terrorism space, we have had incidents in Queensland and Victoria with Desi Freeman and that turned violent. But really, the focus is on your National Socialist network, your right-wing or your far-right-wing violent extremist groups. That is a threat, because what they actually do, and we've seen this in America, they become politicised. And then once which is exactly what the National Socialist movement was starting to do in Australia, form a political party, you get a couple of them elected in their local governance, as we're seeing with the rise of One Nation, then they actually do get a legitimate voice. And that's something that the Prime Minister and actually the government have been trying to understand, identify, and then eradicate for a number of years now.
Harry, what do you think? Oh, we've just lost Harry. Harry, what do you think? Hello.
Well, I think anyone that's here in Australia has a political view, as our constitution, and should have a voice. We may disagree, but where does this stop? I mean, the Prime Minister stopped short of, he doesn't saying white Christian, right wing. That's been often referred to. There's no talk of Islam. So I think any extreme views can potentially be a threat, but whether they actually are is another thing. And I think this is where the danger is. From what I can see, what I can glean from my years of experience and using my intelligence assessment, threat assessment, and so on, is that there are agendas at play here that are being pushed for whatever reasons. We've got to be very careful that our freedom of speech and how we operate and how we move around this country are being attacked from all areas. Now, look, left wing, right wing, I don't buy into that. That's something that was set up to keep people apart. That's my view. We've all got opinions. We're all human, and while we can't get together and have a decent conversation where we may agree to disagree and then move on, this is where the problem lies. And I think frustration then sets in. And what you're seeing now with One Nation is decades of culmination where they actually put her in jail years ago because she's a threat to the Labor and Liberal, which is the left and the right. And now we're seeing in Adelaide where we've got the Labor and Liberal coming out in preferencing One Nation last with the upcoming state election. So if that doesn't tell people and show people what's actually going on, that it doesn't matter who you vote for, you're not actually getting represented. And that's where the frustration comes in. And I'd just like to say and put on the table that we're at this point in history because of decades and decades of malfeasance by both Labor and Liberal for whatever reasons that's occurred. And you've got other parties like the Greens and they're in the mix as well. And unfortunately, the people who are the Commonwealth are not being represented.
Shane's been a critic of the overreaction in issuing directives on these are terrorists, this is a terrorist organisation, this is a terrorist activity. And most of the politicians being, I'm looking at Chairman Minns in New South Wales, he's one of my, I would say one of the main offenders, but none of them can escape some sort of scrutiny because they have this propensity to over exaggerate and terrorism. Shane, this would and Harry's right too. We have our politicians are pathetic. We have this a collective determination to create a great divide within this country. We'll do it by fear. You look at COVID, there you are. There's something by fear. We look at terror, it's fear. We look at all sorts of opportunities to create the fear, and therefore we're going to pit that side against that side, the far right, they're terrible people. How do you, you know within your gut, because this is what you've done or most of your working life, what's your gut saying about the agenda at the moment that's being displayed not only by the government but also by the opposition? Is there a determination to divide and conquer?
So there's a couple of things, and COVID's a key point here. Prior to COVID, like when I was in government, one of the things we used to have to do before major military exercises or the G20 is actually assess and look at what used to be called issue-motivated groups. And they were your protesters outside army bases and wherever the G20 might be or APEC or things like that. That's now what we're calling extremist groups, which is great. You can be the most devout Muslim, you can be the most extreme right-wing, you can be the most extreme vegan. That's fine. It's when you advocate the use of violence to push your ideology across on other people. And that's what we see with what Islamic terrorism is, and when we call right-wing or far right-wing violent extremism, like when the National Socialist Network attacked the Aboriginal camp. You just can't do that. You can stand outside Parliament and do weights and do the Nazi salute. I've got no real issues with that because you're not hurting anyone. You're just looking like a goose. But when you start attacking someone for not having your same ideology or belief structure, that's when you break the law. And that's what we're getting lost in the current debate and conversation. Because someone's saying something that doesn't really affect or work with my belief structure or work with my politics, I might get voted out. That's where the weaponization of words is really coming into effect. And, I used to teach radicalization and violent extremism awareness courses to government, to law enforcement. And they all used to ask me, why is it that the word terrorism is so electric? And for example, the Link Cafe siege went all around the world for 24 hours. There wasn't a major city anywhere in the world that did not have the Link Cafe siege on TV, simply because it had the word terrorism in it. But if you have bikie shootings and all that anywhere in the world, you're not going to get the same kind of coverage. And that's always been the issue, and it's always going to be the political handball. You look at the politics around Bondi. One of the things that's been lost is that Chris Minns had approved the repatriation of the ISIS brides in November 2025. Then you had the ISIS attack at Bondi Beach, and not once did he say anything about that. And it became a campaign for him of deflection. It's them, it's them, it's them. Now you can't find him anywhere talking about any of this, because it's been released that he's involved. So this goes back to that politicisation and the rise of Pauline Hanson's purely because people look at her and think, I know where she stands. And that was the popular appeal to Donald Trump. Like him or hate him, you know that he's Donald Trump. And they're looking for authenticity in our politicians. You don't know who Albanese is. He changes and flips and flops and moves around and gives you word salad. And that's the biggest issue we've got in our main political parties. Look at Barnaby Joyce. You stick a microphone in, he'll change his view. One Nation aren't even on the same page. But that's what the centrists, the middle, the core Australians are just looking for, that Aussie authenticity in our public politicians.
What do you think, Harry? And I do agree with Shane too, but I do think there's an agenda here to divide and, inverted commas, conquer. What it's going to do is divide, and you're going to, I mean, they talk about a civil war in the UK, and I don't want any government saying, oh, what are your law enforcement officers saying that I'm inciting violence, or creating the idea that we need to have a civil war. But if you want to have a war, what you do is you marginalise a particular group and push them and push them and push them. This is the divide bit. The conquering bit, well, as anybody says, as Shane will verify, war of any sort has its own mind, and any politician that thinks they can control it, you've got another thing coming to you. Do you think there is this? Well, first of all, do you think there's an agenda from government to divide and conquer at the moment?
Yeah, I think there is, and we saw that through COVID, where people were treated differently. It was a real shame because not many politicians stood up. The legal system didn't stand up at all, and you got to go look back as to who's paying them and interests and contracts. But the Constitution was disregarded, and then we've got the Biosecurity Act 2015 wasn't even followed. That was the legislation. And it's interesting, when it suits the government, we'll refer to the Constitution. I believe the current Prime Minister said that nothing he can do, it'd be unconstitutional to deny the ISIS brides entry. So, I think it is. And over the decades, people have just been watching. I mean, I grew up in the 80s, 70s and 80s, and we had no inflation, we had prosperity, we had manufacturing. And I know where we were, I know where we are today, and I know how we got here. And I think there are a lot of Australians in the middle ground that grew up and wondering, well, what's happened to this country? And they're looking for answers. The politicians won't or keep moving on, like the Mins that was mentioned earlier. They're on to the next thing, and they're trying to hide it. So they're looking to shut down avenues of truth, speech, like as we've seen in the social media. So what starts happening is, if people they believe they're displaying certain attributes that might be a danger. I mean, look, with Bondi, I mean, there was warning signs for quite a few years. I think ASIO and ACE were taken off the cabinet committee there. They put in the climate czar, whatever you want to call him, in there. So there's been some interesting moves. As to why that's the case, I don't know. But I think people are starting to, with the cost of living crisis now and what's happening all around the world. This is just not something that's only happening in Australia. It's happening in all westernised countries at the same time right now. So it's very interesting that we're all heading at this point. There's been talk about civil war in America. We had so-called insurrection back on a couple of years ago. Yeah, look, I think it is. All this is dividing. The immigration issue is dividing. No one's got a problem with people coming to Australia, but I mean, I'm a product of that. My father and my parents came in the big European drive in the 50s, late 50s. So, and we've all contributed. We all assimilated. Now, what we're seeing now is that it appears to be that people are coming here. They're not assimilating, don't appear to be assimilating, and they're being supported by the people that came before them, who are honest taxpayers and just want to have a fair go. And I think what's happening is people are seeing that we're not getting a fair go, and the rules are being played around with to suit certain agendas for whatever reasons. And I think that's all this is in the mix. And that's why One Nation is now resonating. We've got Liberal Party that have lost their way. They've just had a leadership change, but that's no different. New owner, new puppet, same as the old puppet. Once you walk away from your core values, and that's, I think, what Labor have done as well. They've walked away from their core values as well, as far as the workers go. And I can speak to that. I used to be a Labor voter because I grew up in Marrickville, in Albanese's electorate. Then I went to, having businesses and whatever. I went to Liberal. Now I've got no time for either of them. So, people have just really got to understand what's been done to them. And I think they're looking for answers, but the answer's within, where they've got to go out, get educated, read their Constitution, learn why they're not taught the Constitution or about money and how to be an entrepreneur at school. And then we might get some cohesion and get some answers once the left and the right, who are being kept at odds with each other, come together. And then we might get some traction and start heading back and turn this ship around. That's at the moment it's off the cliff, I believe, and it's in a slow descent to the bottom.
Yeah, I have to say it's very disturbing, all of this, because I mean, Shane's a bit younger than I am, but Harry and I are, we're still in denial.
We're in our prime, mate.
That's exactly right. Thank you for that. But when I grew up, some say I haven't, but there wasn't this. It was a much happier country. And I knew some because I lived in the bush, so I knew people who had a particular attitude in the bush, and they were not all that squizzy with the law. Some would have a copper, but everyone still got on with each other. I hear Anthony Albanese in the background too. Now we move forward to now, and we have the sovereign citizens. They're terrible people. And sure, there have been some terrible shootings, and they say that the people that shot these or the person of each of these shootings was a sovereign citizen. But it doesn't mean that the entire movement, if you want to use such a word, all killers want to kill policemen. I mean, if you look at a lot of the shootings just in the streets in Melbourne and Sydney and even Brisbane, they're from all sorts of religions. So it doesn't mean that all Catholics are all going to be all killers and people that believe all lesbians or whatever. So to target or to brand the sovereign citizens as a dangerous group of people because these poor coppers have been shot is quite. It's just not warranted. And again, it's the fear thing, isn't it, Shane? They want you to fear. They want you to create this divide that anybody who's a sovereign citizen, and by the way, I don't agree with a lot of things they say, but if you do it peacefully, who gives a rat's? It's their right to do it if they want to believe it, providing...
So the problem with sovereign citizens is twofold. One, they don't believe what we believe, which is why they're sovereign citizens. They don't believe in the Australian Constitution. They don't believe in the Australian government, the Australian law. They cause trouble on our roads. They don't have licenses. They don't have registered cars. So there's that aspect, which is why I say it clogs up courts.
Sorry, Shane, not all of them cause trouble on the roads. So you
didn't let me finish, Mike. You didn't let me finish. When COVID kicked in and they started getting food deliveries and things like that, they started building bigger communities because COVID made a lot more people say the government's corrupt, the government's against us. This is a better alternative lifestyle. I was involved in an operation where we actually started looking at the sovereign citizen movement on the central coast of New South Wales, which is pretty big up there, right? And actually look at their values, look at their ideology, look at what they believe, and is there, where's the left and right of arc or their boundaries? Mm-hmm. And I agree. They're just a lot of people that just want to live off the grid. They just want to do their own thing, and I'm all good for that. And so when the law, there's that famous saying, anyone can use statistics in however they want to mold them. And you see a lot of that with law enforcement when it comes to sovereign citizens. And the argument always is they block the courts up. And I say, so what? There's no threat to, no intent or capability to really do any damage to the Australian society. So they're just a way to unite other people to say, it's not us, it's them. And when you throw them in with organisations like the National Socialist Network or groups that do want to cause some Australians harm, I think that's a travesty. And that's where the Albanese speech in his latest declaration really lost a lot in the intelligence community because you're conflating two very, very different organisations and ideologies.
And that itself, Shane, it's an issue because, again, what you're doing is you're creating this mass hysteria or mass fear.
Well, it all comes down to us versus them, and that's the push-pull driver. Whenever we're doing assessments on any ideology, whether it be Sunni Salafist or whether it be, One Nation, whatever it is, you're looking at what's the push-pull, us versus them, and that's how they recruit. this is their issue. Come to us. We can do this for you. You know, Allah's good, or the government's not there to support you, but we can. And so you've got to look at what that belief structure is, and the grievances they have against the outgroup or the government or whoever it is. And that's the middle ground you've got to find. And that's what Albanese is really starting to mix and turn into a massive grey area. And that's when you get confusion.
What do you think, Harry?
Yeah, I think the term sovereign citizen is actually an oxymoron. But I think what's happening at the bureaucratic level or at the intelligence level is that they're getting it a bit skewed. I mean, a lot of the people, and I've done extensive research into this, having a law background and understanding the Constitution now, because it wasn't even taught to me in the AFP, believe it or not. And looking at the common law and where we came from, there is, I believe, it's a common law people that are putting these things through, and there is some basis at law, at natural law, because a lot of people don't understand that it depends on your background, but we have inalienable rights that come from the Creator, and that's God Almighty. I'm Christian, Greek Orthodox. So the hierarchy is the Creator, man, woman, and then the state. Now, what's happened of late is the state is putting itself. Well, actually, it's putting itself, and in some instances, like abortion, full-term abortion, whatever, it's actually playing God. So that's the dilemma, and that's the dynamics at play here. And I think what's happening, what happened with the shooting up in Queensland. Now, I looked at that very closely and analysed it, and there's only been limited information, but it goes from a welfare check to later on they sent 3 junior constables there to later on being, oh yeah, we knew about him, da da da. So that to me signals that just something's not right there, and I don't know. We've had a commission or a coronial inquiry into it, but I've got no confidence that the truth will ever come out. With a lot of things, we've had 2 royal commissions into child abuse, and the first one was shut down, ended up in a 90-year suppression order by John Howard. We had a second one, and Senator Heffernan in the Senate alluded to that suppression order, and that was Brandis in there in the Senate hearing. He was Senator Heffernan was the only one there, and that hasn't gone anywhere either. So we've got a big problem in our bureaucracy, in our constabulary, in our judiciary, and I think this is all in the mix as well. And I think it's very convenient to brand certain people as sovereign citizens, but I don't believe, I don't condone violence. I don't think at any time you should become violent. And any time dealing with police, I always say to them, just go with it and go along and fight your battle later. You don't want to resist arrest, whatever, assault police, because then whatever. And I saw that we went in, and I'll just give you one example. We went into a hitman we believe is notorious for many hits. We had to go and execute a warrant, and we went in there and we thought we were going to have trouble here. We had a specialist team go in there, but he stood there, calm, cool, rang his lawyer, did him a lynch. And there's a prime example of and he was polite, perfect gentleman. There's a perfect example how you should treat yourself in that situation. So, and I think what happens is people get G'd up, and a lot of these movements. There's a lot of fraudsters out there as well that want to make money. There's a lot of scams, so you got to be careful of that. But what I say to people: empower yourself, read your constitution. It's 33 pages. And find out what's actually going on in this country and how we got here, how we've got old Parliament House and the new Parliament House, and how that happened with the Australia Act, and get empowered. And if you want to go down that road, do it from a position where you actually know what you're doing, and don't rely on anyone else to do it, to guide you somewhere, because more than likely you'll find that there's a good possibility what they're telling you or what they're saying may not actually be correct. And the only way you can do that is by... Yeah.
Are you familiar with the common law sheriffs in Western Australia and Victoria?
I've heard of the sheriffs. Yeah, I'm aware of the whole sheriff.
So there's an actual massive group, especially in WA, that fully in all their belief structure that the Constitution's illegal, and they've rewritten their own. They actually have. You can go online and look at their meetings.
Yeah.
They hold full meetings, and then at the end they'll say we're going to charge Albanese with whatever, and they literally take or in their view, court documents. And so I think a lot of it is they're looking for a tribe. It comes
Yeah.
down to, most of them are retirees looking for something to fill their day. But the problem that they do have, especially in the internet age where they stream some of this, you get people that think they're telling the truth, that what they're
Yes,
saying
that's
is
right.
accurate. And their core belief is that the Australian Constitution is illegal. And one of the structures they cling to, I'm half Indigenous. I grew up in an Indigenous community. If you talk about the Australian Constitution to my elders, and they go crazy because stolen land. So, there's many
That is correct.
different.
Look, actually, that is correct. There's no treaty. New Zealand. Now, that's what the Voice, as you would be well aware, the Voice failed because the originals, the people that would hear, and anyone born here, they're sovereign. You're sovereign. Knew what was going on. They
Well,
were
so
trying
the
to
other part of my
put that into the
ancestry is
Constitution. Yeah.
Irish.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the other part of my ancestry came out in chains as convicts. So none
Yeah.
of my ancestry wanted to have happened to them. You know what I mean? And that gets lost. Like even, and part of what I do is I constantly talk to people about their views and their beliefs, and all these people that carry the Eureka Stockade flag, and I'm like, you realise that was a war against Irish miners versus the English sovereign, same as the Kelly. It was all, and they have no understanding of history, the Australian history, where we got to and how we got to where we are today. So I agree. I say education's the silver bullet to everything. Educate yourself, understand the history of Australia. People don't even realise that New Zealand were part of the original vote in the 1890s to become part of Australia, and they voted no to have their own country because of the Maori Wars. And so I agree that it starts in the schools. Let's change the history curriculum. Let's educate ourselves about the Constitution, about how Parliament works, about what and like I used to do the mock debate at school. They don't do that anymore. Where you learn to have a conversation with opposition points peacefully, respectfully. Now it's all screaming for attention. They're actually talking about attention is the number one drug in America because everyone's fighting for it. And with the like Mark Zuckerberg was only before Congress this week about how the Facebook algorithm changes the brains and drives that us versus them and that division amongst people because they deliberately put, and X used to be notorious for it, they would put things into your feed that they knew you were opposed to, so you would argue against it. And then that would build more activity, which would build more ad revenue. So I think if you educate yourself, like I use Ground News, and it'll show you this article is by a left-leaning newspaper or a right-leaning. This is down the centre, and you can type in like I did before this, Sovereign Citizen Australia, and you get say 20 articles, and they'll say this 7 are on the left, and this or this, and it gives you a perspective of both sides of the argument to educate of where do I actually sit in this debate, and I don't think that happens anymore. Where in the 80s, 70s, you knew what you're about, you know what I mean? And I think that's what's been lost.
Harry?
Yeah. I think the news. I mean, they're not reporting, but they're just talking points, and there's no investigative journalism. There's no, it used to be where they report what they report the facts, and then you can make up your own mind, go out and research it. But now they're actually and it's also with social media that's amplified, and unfortunately with our youth. There's been a lot of studies with our youth. I mean, Steve Jobs would not allow any of his kids to have iPads or anything until they got older because it does rewire your brain. And studies have been done on that, and TV as well now with digital TV with the flicker rate. So whether you take it in or not, those subliminal messages are being fed into you. You might not believe it or whatever, but they're there. Whether they get activated or not is what happens to you down the track. You might be triggered or might not be triggered. So it's very we're in a age of. In one respect, the under 16 social ban, I could see where they're coming from, but then again, I think all they've done is actually just piss off a whole generation that against the system. Why can't we get access to this now? Whatever, and all they've done is then they'll go out looking other ways to get around and also look for the truth and as to why it was done. So I think like anything, it's the Streisand syndrome. You do something and it's always the opposite effect.
Shane, Anthony Albanese seems to be deflecting to everyone but Islam. And I see this as one of his major flaws there, and so does most of the Australian public. What's your thoughts?
What do you mean deflecting to everyone but Islam?
Well,
What do you
if you look
mean?
at the far right, and the sovereign citizens and blah blah, but in his speech he didn't talk at all about one of the threats to Australia's security is
So
still radical
I think the
Islam.
biggest we got a coroner's inquest into Bondi going on. We've got the Richardson Review, which has been rolled into the Royal Commission. And as I've been posting, how about the Prime Minister wait till we get the outcomes and the recommendations? Because as someone who used to do terrorism operational review committees and operational threat assessments and be part of these processes, there's a lot to get through, like a lot of interviews, a lot of assessments. And a Prime Minister, and so should Chris Minns, wait until they have the evidence and the facts, not just come out because this group said something. Like, if we're looking at Bondi, any public event has to have a security management plan signed off by both the council and the police prior to the event. Chris Minns would have known about that. Why hasn't he come out and said, this is what that plan looked like? Or why hasn't he come out and said, I was aware in November 2025 that we had a cohort coming back because they were closing the camps in Syria and are Australian citizens. So, like, who was he pandering to then? Let's let the facts come out. Let's let the recommendations. Then let's judge Albanese on the information, because he's been caught short. Like, he came out on the 8th of December after the synagogue bombing in Melbourne and got pressured by the Jewish community to say it was terrorism. And it wasn't. The next day, the AFP and the Victorian police had to come out and say, well, actually, it wasn't terrorism. It was crime. It was arson. So he got in front of his skis then. He got in front of his skis again after Bondi, and the AFP commission had to come out and said, actually, well, the evidence we've got so far suggests something different. So how about I think, in my view, he should wait and see where the evidence points at the end of the day. We've got someone before the courts. What happens if he got, in very hypothetical, not guilty? Like, just say that happened, right? Which has happened in other matters. Like, I was heavily involved in the juveniles that were arrested after the Bishop Amari stabbing. They were put before the courts and assessed and not guilty. And that was all an overreaction because the public or the politicians needed answers. So I think that sometimes the politicians are damned if they do and damned if they don't. If he doesn't say anything, he looks weak. If he does, he looks like he's pandering to someone, and then he's wrong. So while I think he's doing a terrible job in a number of facets, at the same time, I'd also like to think that he's actually going to let the Royal Commission, the Richardson Review, the Coroner's Inquest go through their legal and legislative processes. He gets the results from them and then makes informed, accurate decisions.
Yeah, I agree, probably not entirely, but close to it. We're just trying to get Harry to come back to us because we can hear Harry.
It's normally me having this trouble.
You're pretty good right now. Don't you disappear on me.
Touch wood.
Otherwise, I'm going to have a scotch before I finish. But Shane, while we're trying to get Harry back, do you think a major problem at the moment, take away the politicians and the media getting on the bandwagon, is that the leadership of our, say, for example, law enforcement and police, and we look at the shootings in New South Wales, we look at the shootings in Queensland, and in both cases, command was just appalling. What's your views on that? And should they have an investigation into why they sent these poor young coppers out to, for example, in Queensland, and then with Desi Freeman, what happened to the SWAT squad? It seems like command.
So I was involved in the inquest into Queensland because I was annoyed at the terminology being used. For a start, it wasn't an ambush, but second of all, it was a Queensland police ass covering exercise because they had information when one of the brothers was caught sneaking across the border with weapons. So whoever did the operational threat assessment of that warrant or that check that day is the one that should be charged for negligence, because the fact that they knew there was an issue at that premise, which is why they sent 4 police officers to a location where they knew 2 brothers had extremist views and that had firearms. They had that information. And this goes to using terms like terrorism and ambush so the actual spotlight doesn't go onto Queensland Police operations and leadership. And the same thing with the Desi Freeman. So the Desi Freeman's a little bit interesting because I had former colleagues that went down and helped in the search with the military. There was a government push to allow Desi to get away and across the border to go to another location where he would be found. They could say it was a sovereign citizen deliberate movement, put a face and a name to the organisation, and tying into what we're talking about here, then put that group before the legislation to say they're now a domestic violent extremism group. And I posted a fair bit about that at the time and actually did the other day about it. That was the intent from the government, was to make it a cross-jurisdiction at a national level and say it's a coordinated group. Therefore, we need to determine that this group is a domestic violent extremist organisation, just as they were trying to do the same thing with a national socialist network. And so the Desi Freeman one was a deliberate push by Michelle Rowland and Tony Burke, who I think is our worst. I can't believe I'll say this out loud, but he's our worst Home Affairs Minister ever. But that was the coordinated effort with the Desi Freeman. They actually didn't want him caught in Victoria. They wanted him caught across the border where he is now. He's in New South Wales. They wanted him arrested there so they could say that both sides of that border made it a national issue. He had help. That a network goes around Australia. Therefore, it's a threat to all Australians. They've got firearms. They're preppers, all this kind of thing. Therefore, give it a name, and that becomes a violent extremist organisation under Australian legislation. And they were trying to do the same thing, bait, with the National Socialist Network. One of the case studies for this is the Clavell brothers, the arrest of the Clavell brothers. They knew how that turned out. One of those brothers then went and married an ISIS supporter from overseas. So they did a bit of research on that. But, yeah, the biggest issue for me in the Queensland one was it simply became about covering up Queensland police leadership, which that's who failed there. They knew the brothers had firearms. They knew because, like I said, one of the brothers got caught coming in from New South Wales into Queensland. They had a lot of information, threat information on the brothers, and they should never have just seen a couple of uniformed police. That should have been a tactical unit gone out to execute that warrant.
We're having Harry's here. I'm watching him off camera, and he's here, and that he's not here. Shane, you're doing a great job, and thank you so much. Otherwise, it's going to be chaos.
I owe you one, mate.
No, well, we owe you a few too. Harry, what's your views? I think you still would have been caught hearing what Shane's saying. Command in Queensland and command in New South Wales with the unfortunate shooting of the police officers and those ones that shot those police officers, may they all rot in hell. But command, I mean, and Shane is right. What do we do about it? How do we make the police force better? I mean, I could tell you some stories. My dad used to talk about various police forces, and but I won't say anything. But he was quite he was not kind about some of the police forces we're talking about now. And that does seem to have changed a whole lot. How do we fix it? How do we make them more accountable? How do we make them, like to protect and serve? Harry's frozen. That's going well. Shane, I'm going to flick this straight back to you. How do we do it?
So it comes back to training.
Yes. Yep. We have Harry. Harry, sorry, he's gone again. But back to you, Shane.
Yeah. So, and as someone who's worked, for 20 years with law enforcement, both at the state and federal level, conducted training with them, been a presenter. I used to be a Australian New Zealand Counter-Terrorism Committee teacher on various topics. So, education and training. They're not getting enough force on force, quick decision exercise training at the entry level. Then they go out into the streets and they're getting more dangerous for a number of reasons. And I think it starts with that. You look at the training we used to do in the tactical assault group, day in, day out to deal with these life and death operations. and then you put that across to law enforcement's, and I mean training hours, not the style of training hours, force on force, stressful situations, how to do quick decision exercises under stress, under fatigue, these kind of things. What's the end state? So we would do after action reviews. We'd run a scenario, come straight back, right, what did you make that decision for? What was your justification for shooting? And this is all in the domestic space. So every year in October, the Tactical Psych Group does a handover Mars Olympics exercise. The first 2 days, you're actually rehearsing being in front of a coronial inquest. You're in the witness box. During that exercise, you went in and you shot that terrorist. What made that illegal shoot? What was your justification for pulling the trigger? What was the threat he posed or she posed or whatever it is? So straight off the bat, before you go on that 12-month cycle in the Tactical Psych Group, is ingrained in you that you're now under a jurisdiction where if you go to a domestic terrorist incident and you've got to neutralise a terrorist, you will be in a witness box to justify your decision. I don't think we see similar stress tests at the local state law enforcement level. And then, like you see on the TV last night, that young kid where he had 2 New South Wales PAWS officers in there punching him while they're handcuffing him. There's no need for that. Like, I've been spat on and all that kind of stuff, and I've got a temper like the best of them. But there's an escalation in use of force processes, and I just don't think these days the state law enforcement officers at the tactical, the coalface level, receive the level of training required for the terrible job they've got to do.
Harry, what do you think? It's I have history. My dad was copper, and we know all sorts of policemen. And I would hate to be in the police force too, by the way, especially if you're one of the and I know people who are very senior, so they're probably not going to talk to me after this. But the ones that have been sent out on the front line, basically under the directive of command. Do you think they have a whole lot of respect? And I mean, they have respect. They have respect for their for their state, and they have respect for the police force. But do you think they have a whole lot of respect for command? And if you look at New South Wales and Queensland, you'll see 2 massive failings of command.
Yeah, we've had a lot of failures. And so I did hear that earlier from Shane about the inquest. It's very interesting to hear all that information, because pretty much that's what I thought was actually happening, just putting all the information together at the time as to what was happening with Desi and then with the Queensland shooting at the Guatemala. Yeah, I think there's been breakdowns of command or leadership. And I think, unfortunately, I think we're in an era now where the people that are coming through are a product of the school system and the university system and the social engineering. So and I think what we're seeing now is that the competence level is not where it was in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And we're seeing that coming through. And I'd hate to be a frontline police officer today. Obviously, they go out with the best of intention, but after what we saw during COVID down in Victoria, where they were checking people whether they had coffee in their cups, and a lot of those images we saw, I think police lost a lot of respect and a lot of favour from the public. Like I said, when you got old people sitting on a bench and being treated roughly, there's no need for that. There is an escalation. I was always taught you go in soft and you escalate if you have to. You never, because if you do that, you can't back down. The only way to go is, sky high. And that's where things get out of control. And, unfortunately, and then there's people that go into the job for the wrong reasons and let that badge go to their head. But, you've got to treat it with a respect. If you respect people, you treat people the way you want to be treated, and that comes back. And I never had a problem dealing with that. Once you can talk to people and normalise with them, and I've found that in business as well. I mean, I left the AFP in 2006. I was also at ICAC for 5 years, Independent Commission Against Corruption, and I've had businesses, where I've dealt with customers, dealing with the public. So you've just got to do that. I think that if you do that in life, and I think if everyone sort of stepped back and remembered that they're all human, and humanised situations, I think the place would be a lot better place. And I think police, and a lot of police do that, but unfortunately, they all get bunched in with the odd instances where we see the bad instances, and then unfortunately there's cover-ups to protect the force or whatever it is, and the truth never gets out, and unfortunately that feeds on that as well. And then there's a distrust and a disconnect between the bureaucracy, and the government and the police. And and we saw that play out a bit with the war crimes. We've just had the war crimes go through with what happened overseas with the SAS and whatever. So this is sort of a play at all levels, and it doesn't help. But it's not conducive to good governance, and it's not conducive to social cohesion.
And I think Shane, you've experienced enormous stress, especially when in operations, and a clear head is always necessary. If you look at Australia, our history, we've been a little bit protected over the years. Even now, it's changing though. But if you look at your training was intense. You were if you didn't follow your training and use your brains and handle stress, you wouldn't be here now. The police forces such as Victoria and Queensland and New South Wales, they seem to not be handling stress that well. And part of the I suppose the fuel of the stress levels is also being fed by the politicians. And then you have hierarchy, and I've read numerous stories about the hierarchy of the Australian military defence forces, and a lot of things aren't all that complimentary about them. And they say it always rots from the head down. Do we need a clean out? Do we need the police to understand stress? And that's where your military background comes into it. Can you integrate, for example, the training of, and they may do this now, but can they integrate the training of how to handle stress, keep the mind clear, say from a military point of view, and incorporate that in a police point of view?
So you can, and you see this in, say, the martial arts or the boxing world, but it's repetitions under stress. It doesn't happen in a week, it doesn't happen in a month. It happens over years and that time. So, for example, in a military context, before we went to Afghanistan, you're training for a year every day in that kind of environment, under stress, under fatigue. So slowly as your body, your central nervous system gets used to that, things slow down. And then you can make clearer decisions, and then you get used to making decisions. So one thing in the military, we learn to shoot, move, and communicate. I'm going here, you're going there, this kind of thing. That's not taught in the police force. So they don't do a scenario where two police get out of a car, there's people yelling at them, and the first thing the police do is have to assess a situation together and individually. Do they have a structure in place? We have the individual military appreciation process. What have I got to do? How do we work? We know how we're going to move together. That's not being taught at the police level, why they're under stress. And the problem is it costs a lot of money to have a training burden like that. So if you have 100 police officers out on the beat, that another 100 have to be back training for those scenarios, doing weapons training. So I was really vocal when Chris Minns said they're going to give M4s to more police around New Year's Eve. Well, what training did they do? How many rounds did they have on the range? How often were they getting access to those weapons to do their degrees of weapons readiness training, their immediate action drills? In the Army, you do it all the time, and you still have negligent discharges with soldiers. And yet you're giving automatic weapons to police that have probably had them once a month for a couple of months and fired maybe a couple hundred rounds. That's not how it works. They live and breathe with that weapon. They learn its intricacies. They learn its drills. What happens for a block? Shoot, look through the target before you pull the trigger. All these things, it was just typical politician making themselves look tough, but not actually thinking, what if one of those officers had to use that weapon and shot an innocent civilian down at Circular Quay on New Year's Eve during the fireworks? Like, who do we blame? They would blame the policeman for his actions, not Chris Minns for putting no training behind it and no stress test. There's a very good book by a former US Army Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. The book's called Killology, but it really goes into the psychological of this process of operating under stress and what the US military and then the Australian and the British and Canadians did to inoculate soldiers into being able to make better decisions in that high threat environment, yeah, and that's where you learn these quick decision exercises. And I think for me, having worked with law enforcement right across the spectrum, that's what they need to do to make better police, to make better decisions.
Harry, and we are going to run out of time fairly soon. Um, Besides, also the other stresses is there are not enough coppers. They can't get enough to join, and then they start talking about lowering the standards, and that's the last thing you want. But looking at and I'm going to go right back then to the sovereign citizens, looking at the enormous stress and pressure that the police are under at the moment to do the right thing, and everybody's got a mobile phone, everybody can film it. There's cameras everywhere, so they are on display 24/7. How do you see, because we have Albanese and the Australian government and other governments saying that the sovereign citizens are dangerous to us, they're going to kill us all, something stupid like that. When there becomes an escalation, for example, with a couple of sovereign citizens, I'm just looking at a make-believe example here, that they say, we don't recognise whatever, and we're not going to do it. The approach from the police, if they're under enormous pressure and stress, and they haven't been trained properly, and they have in the back of their mind Prime Minister saying they are really bad eggs, what we could have is a very unfortunate incident, which will then fuel the flames even more. How do we train not only the police but the politicians? One, the politicians has shut the f up and talk about something they know. And how do we teach the police? Because as you said, softly, softly. Otherwise, if you go in hard, then you have got nowhere to go. How do we train the coppers using what Shane has said to make them better coppers to protect and serve? Not and people have this terrible imagery over COVID of what the Victorian police did. And I remember one old lady, and she was being attacked by a whole bunch of Victorian police. We don't need that, and we understand that they are all under pressure. But you don't treat the people who you are protecting and serving. You don't treat them that way, and it will happen again. So how do we teach them to treat the people that they are protecting and serving, and have a better outcome before something terrible happens?
It's a bit hard, especially during COVID. I know the New South Wales Police Commissioner at the time said they're going to treat the virus as a criminal and go out and pretty much, to me, that says, look, do what, to the police. It gives them carte blanche to, we're going to do what you got to do. And, but that's, things like statements like that don't help the situation. And I think Shane hit it on the head. Training. There's not enough training. I know when I was there, I think all you did was your annual qualifying shoot. But I was lucky. We've got a range where we were upstairs. So any moment I had a spare time, I'd go up there and use my Glock and try and use it and expend the rounds and get as much training as I could get in. But we're busy, and it's probably even busier now. So I don't think that luxury is potentially there anymore, unless you're in a specialist unit. So I think it comes from training again, what they're teaching the police at the academy, and what they're instilling in them. And at the end of the day, the police have got to realise that you're a constable of police. You're responsible. You've got the authority, and you've also got the option to do or not do certain things under the legislation. So you got to be very wary. Ultimately, whatever you do, you're responsible, and you can't, irrespective of what a politician or your commander or anyone else says. At the end of the day, if it goes south, you're going to have to justify it and wear whatever happens. And we've seen many cases of that.
Shane, just to wrap this up, because Anthony Albanese, the supremacists, the white supremacists, and we have the sovereign citizens that are a threat to our security. In your opinion, what are our main threats to our security?
So there's definitely a threat from a lone actor across the space, whether his ideology is right-wing violent extremism, Sunni Salafist violent extremism, political violent extremism. But that is the main threat: is the lone individual actor or lone small group, because of the online threat. Anyone, and if you look at the last 10 incidents within Australia, all of them were radicalised online. And from there, it's hard to, because they're initially under the detection threshold of law enforcement and the intelligence agencies, sitting in their room, sitting on their phone, starting to get this ideology, this belief structure, and then it becomes us against them, and then that's when the escalation to extremism, and then violent extremism, and then violence. But the major threat across Australia, the spectrum right now, is a individual, lone individual, or a small group of any, from right wing right through to Saudi Salafism to political violent extremism, because there's such a division. It's us versus them. It's the government against me. They're in their own echo chambers online. So if you're a Sunni Salafist, you're only reading your Quran, you're only mixing with people of the same belief structure. If you're in the National Socialist Network, all your eco structure is, and your community is, like-minded individuals, and you're just amping yourself up. Or if you're like the Tra Brothers or a religiously motivated group, same thing. You're just in your own echo chamber. And so that's the threat and the challenge for intelligence agencies, is to identify each individual ideology and then start collecting against it.
Harry, you have the final say. What is our main threat to our security?
Yeah, exactly. That basically what Shane said. That's 100%. But I think what's missing in the mix here is, how did we get here? We've had this incident. It started with 9/11, where we had that terrible incident in New York, and we've had destabilisation of the Middle East, and what's gone on there, all those wars, and now we've ended up with all these people that are radicalised because they've had loved ones or whatever killed, and it's given it's given elements out there in the community to take advantage and twist that and use it to their advantage to create this hate and division. So I think what's missing in the mix, we've got to protect our country, we've got to make sure, keep everyone safe, but we've got to turn the clock back and actually understand where we're at today, how we got here, and then we could maybe come up with some solutions. The solution is branding this one, branding that one, branding them, whatever. Yeah, that's fine, but we can't be everywhere. I mean, they are trying that at the moment with the AI and the surveillance state and what they're trying to set up, but there's even limitations with that. So I think that's one critical thing that I haven't really heard. I don't hear much of anyone actually looking back, reflecting, and saying, well, when did it start? Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the 70s. There was no terrorism. It was all, and it all started after 9/11. So, and then we've had Bali. We've had a lot of incidents where this hate, this vendettas, this ideologies all of a sudden come to light, and now we've got problems everywhere. And all we're trying to do is put band-aids all over the place. And unfortunately, there's not enough band-aids. There's not enough police. There's not enough to fix the problem. So I think if we can do that, and then maybe reflect, and then maybe we might be able to come up with some solutions, some ideas that'll actually change. And that's education in the schools, de-radicalisation, things like that. But that's what we need to do. And and I think that's the only way through. Otherwise, we're just going to keep going the same way and just creating more division. And then obviously having the authorities, the intelligence agents, the police, forever having to increase resources to keep trying to keep on top of what's going on to try and predict the next terrorist attack or the next incident, whether it's a lone wolf or a group.
Interesting. Shane, if somebody wants to find out more about you, how do they do that?
So Twitter, Terrorist Hunter 6 is probably the best bet, or Shane Healey JP on LinkedIn.
And Harry, what about yourself?
Yeah, I'm on X and Facebook and on Telegram, just under my name, Harry Hatziklinios.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it very much. Thanks for not dropping out, Shane, although you did behind the scenes just then. My heart stopped. You came back. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad I'm not alone then.
No, it's part of the it's part and parcel of the whole thing. This has been the Protagonists. Thank you so much to our guest. What happens next? Who knows? I think what we need to do is just zip some of these politicians' lips. Good luck on that one too. And the fact that Pauline Hanson and One Nation is rocketing ahead in the polls says a lot about the policies and the way they're acting from the other two major parties, the Conservatives and the Labor Party. They're both behaving and acting quite terribly, and it's very un-Australian in what most of them are doing, and the lies that they come out with to protect us are just that, lies. And you will eventually be caught out, aka Pauline Hanson's One Nation. This has been The Protagonists. Catch you tomorrow. Short show today, very short indeed. And also The World Today on tomorrow, if that makes any sense. I'm going to go home for a drink. Goodbye. Take care.